with our last session, but a very, very important one. And I'm really, really excited about the panel that we have because what we wanted to do with Step Up initially was to bring all stakeholders together. And I don't think any of our panels has got close to bringing more stakeholders together than this one. So that's why I'm excited to have this panel, which looks with five people, a large one, but a very relevant one. So that's what I wanted to welcome all our panelists to this session. And what I would do is I will take the next 2 minutes just to introduce the session, set the rules, and tell you a bit more administrative things on how we will be conducting this session. So thanks to everyone who's joining us on Zoom as well as on Facebook Live. My name is Mayur and I'm the co-founder of Mattrvest. Mattrvest is a young fintech startup wherein what we're trying to do is we're trying to empower you to manage your money, not just in a better way, but also in a planet-friendly way. We want to connect you to sustainable finance, and we want to bridge that gap that exists today wherein sustainable finance is mostly available to high net worth individuals. And we want to increase awareness. We want you to get started with saving your money sustainably. You can find more about our website. But I want to talk to you more about Step Up. Why are we doing this? Because the idea was not to just do another webinar. The idea was actually that there are so many and multiple stakeholders in the sustainable finance ecosystem. And if we talk about Europe or the EU in specific, what we wanted to do was when it comes to retail investors or in specific when it comes to people like you and me, there was not many platforms where people could come together. The idea is this, that we want to get all these stakeholders to come together and spark a dialogue, because that is where we need to be. And the name Step Up comes from the fact that it's 2020. We're 10 years away from the 2030 agenda or the SDG goals, and we are really, really running behind them. So there is a need to step up. There is a need to accelerate the pace towards sustainable development, and it's become very, very imperative, as you can see with everything that is happening around us. And finance and capital is one of the ways to do it and to trigger this change in a much faster way. So what we have done is that we had a range of discussions on topics over the last 2 days, and which have ranged from pensions, which we'll be talking about today, to talking about the impact of our savings, which we did in a couple of sessions back, to the role of financing of SDGs and other things which we discussed yesterday. If you miss those sessions, don't worry, you can always go to the Mattrvest page, Facebook page. Everything was on FB Live, so you can see the sessions there as well. We can't do this without the people that you see on the screen, as well as the others who have joined us through yesterday as well as today. And these are the change makers. These are the people who are putting their best foot forward in their own sector and in their own space and trying to make a change. And we want their voices to be heard as well, as much as your voices should be heard by them. It is a two-way interaction, and that's what we're trying to create. So thanks to all of you for coming in. And this is where I'm going to shut up and start becoming more of a moderator than a presenter. So we will start this session with a presentation by the AEIP team, which is Alex and Christos, which will give you an overview of the pension and the bipartisan sector. So Alex, if you want to take the screen over, you can do that. I'll stop sharing my screen in a bit. Then we will have a panel discussion and followed by a Q&A. For the Q&A, you can ask your questions in the Zoom Q&A tab. And if you're watching this session on Facebook Live, you can also leave comments in the Facebook Live session. And those questions will be directed by our team to this Q&A session as well. So Alex, I'll stop sharing my screen and pass it over to you. Just one last thing I will say to our audience is that at the end of this session, we will do a poll where you will, of course, we will ask you to rate the session. But in addition to that, we will also ask you about how much financial jargon did we use during the session while explaining concept, because we want to work towards becoming a jargon-free festival, which is a bit like zero waste, but yeah, we want to at least put an attempt and a foot forward towards that. So we'll be taking those polls, so please keep an eye on how much jargon is said. Thank you. Alex, over to you.
Thank you so much, Meyer, and thank you to for the invitation to Mattrvest. We very much appreciate being here. Great initiative, great topic. My name is Alexandra, and I'm representing the European Association of Paritarian Institutions. With my colleague Christos, we prepared a couple of slides just to introduce this specific type of pension funds and institutional investors, and to give you a little bit more context on how they participate in these current developments on sustainable finance. So over the next 7 minutes, we'll just give you an introduction to how we operate. So starting with a brief definition of what paritarism is, it's a type of self-organization that allows social partners, the employer representatives, trade unions, and employer organizations to engage in collective bargaining and to conclude collective agreements for setting up social protection funds as pension funds, healthcare funds, accident insurance funds that are then managed on collective basis between these two social partners and provide social protection coverage. This basically means that in the management boards of a paritarian pension fund, you would always have equal number of representatives between employer and trade union organizations. And in terms of their specific activity as investors, pension funds that are managed on paritarian basis cannot be considered as purely financial institutions because they have a very clear social purpose. So their first objective when active on the financial markets is to ensure stable return and stable pension benefits to their beneficiaries. At the same time, they're long-term institutional investors, meaning that they manage assets and investments with a time horizon that expands to decades in many cases, and it's linked to their liabilities. And as a last point here, the paritarian pension funds that we represent are subject to national social and labor law provisions. So their structure and operation varies from one member state to another, so it's very different. And at the EU level, they're also subject to the minimum harmonization framework set up by the IROP 2 directive, which is the directive of institutions of occupational pension, occupational retirement provision. And this is the instrument, the EU level, that regulates their operation. Moving to what exactly my organization does, it represents this specific type of social protection providers managed by the two social partners on equal basis. Our members are not-for-profit, they're based in an EU member state, and they're long-term institutional investors too. We represent 30 social protection providers that collectively cover around 18 million European citizens and manage 1.3 billion. We wanted to also show you that in 2018, we did an internal mapping exercise asking our members how they factor and how they incorporate ESG, environmental, social, and governance factors in their investment portfolios. And we include just 2 points here, the ones that we thought are most relevant for the topic of today. Why paritarian funds are incorporating ESG factors. And you see we included the 4 most prominent considerations they mentioned to us. So definitely risk management considerations, reputational considerations, responsibility to beneficiaries and fiduciary duty, and financial opportunity. So these are the main drivers that our members, being paritarian institutional investors and paritarian social protection providers, have indicated to us as why they why they incorporate ESG factors. And the second point I wanted to mention was on how they do that. So basically what strategies they employ in order to incorporate ESG factors. And we mostly heard norms-based exclusion is one of the strategies. So one or combination of those four points are what our members are doing in order to incorporate ESG. Sustainability team investment as a second part, best in class, and selective integration of ESG factors in financial analysis. So I could go into more details in the discussion part, but I'll just stop points from me. We wanted just to give you an overview about the policy process in the EU. I'm not going to go through all these points. The idea here is just to show that it's a relatively complex process that started in 2015 with the conclusion of the Paris Agreement that's triggered a whole series of steps and involved many stakeholders in Europe. Probably the most important milestones here would be the final EU action plan that was adopted in March 2018 on sustainable finance that became the basis for several legislative proposals that came up from the European Commission in the same year. The 2 most important for us were the proposal for regulation of taxonomy. So basically the European Commission made a proposal on a common definition of what would constitute environmentally sustainable investment. And the second piece of legislation that was really important for us that came out also in May 2018 was the regulation on disclosures, on sustainability team disclosures. And both regulations were adopted later in 2019. And the state of play now is that we're expecting a renewed sustainable finance strategy to come out at the end of this year. That will be then the basis for the implementation of the European Green Deal. So I will stop here and I'll give the word to Christos, who will tell you a little bit more about our specific position on sustainable finance.
Thank you very much. Yeah, in this context, we thought it's good to give you just some main points from our perspective as pension funds are long-term institutional investors. So first of all, our organization and our members have been supporting and monitoring very closely sustainable finance at the EU level for the very first moment. And of course, there was a big input exercise that we were also part of. And at the same time, we would like to stress that an overarching goal for pension funds are to maximize the returns for their beneficiaries and to ensure an adequate revenue for old age. So this is, of course, something that needs to be taken into account first and foremost. At the same time, we understand the urgency for pushing a taxonomy on environmental factors, but for the future, we should also focus on social factors, the S out of the ESG. Moving on, there were several challenges that I would like to stress, but we can also go into more detail during the Q&A session. A big challenge for institutional investors, but also investees, are that any new legislative framework should have a good ESG data availability, comparability, and quality. It's very important to structure and do it correctly. And of course, our organization is in favor of increasing ESG transparency, but at the same time, we should take into account that the landscape in Europe for national sectoral pension funds is so diverse that we should also take some historical and social particularities of each funds there. So not the one-fits-all approach, which brings me to our final also point that any new legislative requirements, most importantly, any disclosure requirements should also understand that these small pension funds cannot lift the burden, and that could be potentially very costly. So thank you very much also again for your invitation, and we're looking forward for a fruitful discussion.
Thanks a lot, Alex and Christos. Thanks a lot for giving us kind of a primer. Alex, I think you can stop sharing the screen if you don't mind. And we can just move into a discussion and take it a bit more high level. And I will start with asking this to Patrick. Patrick, how sustainable are our pensions in Europe today? If I'm an European, and if I'm of course contributing to my pensions, what are the chances that it's going towards something sustainable? Patrick, you're on mute right now.
Sorry.
Perfect.
So I will share my point of view, but I'm not sure I'm the best to answer this regarding the other member of the panel. Maybe I have more interesting view on the other points of the discussion, but I can give you my feeling, I would say, without using too much figures. Our perception as fund managers and fund distributors is that the maturity and sensitivity, I would say, of the different countries in Europe is really not the same. I mean, we see a really different approach from the north of Europe, Nordics, than the Netherlands, where if you're looking at the big institutional investors, they are active in SRI since a long time. For instance, what we are building exclusion lists for which is one right policy, and we are using lists from these actors, like the Petroleum Fund, for instance, in Norway. They have moved to SRI since a long time, so they're a kind of model for I think for the rest of Europe Also, you have the big pension funds in the Netherlands that are also really active on that one. So I would say there is to answer that, the first answer is to say it's probably different regarding different geography of Europe. There is also a lot of differences in the type of SRI which is done in the different countries. I was looking to a study about this, like some countries are more using negative screen. Countries like in France, I think they use more norm-based screenings. So there is also a different of culture. So that's very good now that Europe is trying to give common rules and help the different countries to build labels, but there remaining some difference between the countries. But I would say that the SRI is strongly growing, of course, and it's mainly driven by the institutional investors, and those pension funds are those actors being part of this. They're in northern of Europe, as I said. So that would be my first answer to your question, and I will.
No, thanks a lot, Patrick. And I know I agree with you, and I think that's a question I want to take around the table. And Seth, I would put that to you next about representing Pension EU. What is your opinion regarding the sustainability of pensions and a larger view on how we should think about it as retail investors?
First of all, I will say that it's very difficult to provide figures on the level of sustainability of financial reasons, basically. I think that Christophe already mentioned one of the reasons is that we currently lack of data on the sustainability level of companies. And to have an idea of the sustainability level of a financial product, we need to have the data on the underlying activities. This is one of the main challenges we face as financial entities in the current context. Another point I would mention as well is that the framework in Europe on sustainable finance is, I will say, for example, and that was mentioned by Alexandra before, the taxonomy regulation has been adopted recently, and the taxonomy provides for a common definition of what activities can be considered as sustainable. This is new. Then we still need to incorporate this new taxonomy and to comply with this taxonomy in the forthcoming years. As mentioned by Patrick, this is true that within Europe, between European countries, and that's true that the countries that are more advanced in terms of SRI are the Nordic countries or the Netherlands. Despite this, we can say that there is a clear trend in the pension sector towards sustainable investments. Many pension funds already included ESG considerations when they select their investment opportunities. And I think that Alexandra provided already a good overview of different kinds of ESG in the pension sector, such as the exclusion screening strategy or the best-in-class approach. I think it is also very important to insist on the fact that the primary objective of pension funds will always be to provide good retirement income to individuals. In this sense, it is true that pension funds will incorporate more and more ESG considerations into their decision-making process, but it is very unlikely that pension funds will offer pensions with pure sustainable objectives.
Thanks a lot, Seth. Thanks a lot for bringing up the ESG part as well, because we've had a range of views over the last 2 days in the festival with ESG getting a lot of names in different sessions, from a spectrum of ESG is a bullshit criteria to ESG is the first step to ESG can mean anything that you want. So I completely agree with it. It's a debate, but it's, I think, a process movement. And this is where I want to pass to get Hina, if you could unmute yourself and tell us about how Make My Money Matter started, because we, as Mattrvest, as well as for you guys, we need to talk the language of people and how they understand pension and how they understand these movements. So please tell us a bit more about the background to the whole movement and what's been happening, and then your view on how the pension sector is evolving towards sustainability.
Of course, thanks, Maya. I'll try and keep it brief. First, I'd like to thank you all for allowing me to speak on a panel about sustainable pensions in the EU. I think the less said about that, the better at the moment, looking at the current political context. Make My Money Matter as an organisation was co-founded by Richard Curtis. Some of you may know him from his work doing various things like Love Actually, and he's a film director and writer. And he came to this through his charitable work. He worked on Make Poverty History, Comic Relief, and is also a UN ambassador for the Sustainable Development Goals. So that's sort of his journey to this. And he's obviously spent time thinking about how nation states, how individuals, and now moved on to how private finance can help drive sustainable development practices, more specifically, but also thinking more broadly about the fact that, and I think as a storyteller, it's really powerful when you talk to an ordinary person with a pension, because actually the story is, if you have a pension, most people, when they get paid every month, or certainly in the UK, we have auto enrolment now, you pay however many hundreds of pounds into a pension fund, and you know it goes somewhere and it's saving and that you should save this money. But actually there's a really limited understanding of the fact that that money is, one, even invested in financial markets or companies and the way that that works, but two, what those companies do. And I'm sure we've seen and we'll all appreciate the growth of the sustainability agenda more broadly, and also the growth of sustainable brands and sustainable lifestyles amongst consumers. And actually, it's odd to think that you might have your average European consumer who has gone vegetarian because they care about the planet, they don't use a plastic bag anymore, they use a reusable cup, they only use renewable energy in their home, but actually because they don't know where their pension's going every month, they're harming the planet in a much more meaningful way through something that they think is saving for their retirement, which sort of undermines all these lifestyle choices that they Money Matter. What we're trying to do is to, and it's a really challenging task, exactly as you said, there's a lot of jargon, there are lots of layers of complexity, each country has its own way of thinking about how pensions work, people have very low levels of financial education in general, but trying to raise awareness of the fact that you have a pension, that pension means you have power within the financial system, and you should be asking the question to your employer, to your pension provider, about where that money is invested and whether that money is invested in line with your personal values. And I think in terms of the broader question about where sustainable pensions are, I'm not an expert on Europe, and I'd hesitate to say I'm an expert in pensions in the UK either, but I think what we can see of organisations like Mattrvest, there's another organisation called Tumalo in the UK, which is looking at engaging people as activist shareholders, and also in the growth of quote unquote ESG, sustainable funds, sustainable offers from asset managers, pension providers and firms. So people are starting to wake up to the fact that people care about this stuff. But I would say, sort of as a snapshot, without wanting to get too technical, in defined contribution pensions in the UK, there is only one large master trust, which is the government-led one. It's called Nest. It has about 9 million savers that has made a commitment to Paris alignment. So they've 2050 and halve their emissions by 2030, and they've excluded tobacco from their standard portfolios. And that is, in terms of volume, that's a leading commitment we have so far. And our aim as a campaign is to get consumers to ask the question so we can shift more large funds in that direction.
That's very interesting, Hannah. And I think, well, I want to shift the gears of the conversation more towards the drivers. And I think briefly Patrick and even Seth touched on the taxonomy, and I also want to bring in PEP into this discussion. So, Christos, maybe I could get started with you giving people a brief background on PEP, and then we can talk about some of the drivers around pensions in the EU,
Thank
which
you,
would be
Mayu.
driving.
Yes, for the viewers, actually, yeah, I could make an introduction that the PEP actually is a so-called pan-European personal pension product. So it's an effort by the European Union to create an individual product, individual pension product, which is third pillar, so private, which will be available and throughout Europe. So in order to facilitate also the enrollment in this kind of product for specifically for mobile workers or for people who haven't stayed in the same country for all their careers. So from this perspective, it's a pure third pillar, as we call it, product. It's IORPs, so occupational pension funds, have can provide this kind of product if they wish. However, so far none of our members has provides the PEP, and our collective pensions that are built up and managed collectively by social partners as part of a broader collective agreement. Well, it's certainly very very positive that the PEP mentions ESG factors, and especially policies that are addressed to potential members, so people who want to sign a contract for the PEP and customers that are thinking about the PEP. It's included there in the latest EU technical standards legislation. It's included that during the phase that a potential member is searching for the PEP, it should be informed about ESG ESG factors. And for example, I kept here one of the extracts of the PEP that says that this document, which is called the key information document, I'm sorry for the technical jargon on that. So this kind of document shall include narrative explanations and quantitative information, where available, on how the integration of ESG and expected performance of the PEP providers' investments. So definitely there is a mention to ESG factors there.
Thanks, really, Christos, and that's why I wanted to kickstart that discussion, because we don't want to talk about only the status quo today. We want to talk about what is happening for the purpose of our viewers to understand what is driving a sectoral change towards sustainable pension. And Saf, if I could just come back to you on this. So in your opinion, what are some of the biggest things? There is PEP, there is taxonomy. How is this going to influence the pension sector and individual pensions for tomorrow?
Oh, thank you for, oh, sorry. Please go.
Go ahead if you want to.
Thank you. I can make an introduction to also explain that the taxonomy is a tool to help investors also and all kinds of market participants to understand, as Saif mentioned before, also, and Alexandra, what constitutes an sustainable economic activity. From that perspective, the procedural part has been a really long and difficult technical procedure there. And perhaps maybe Saif would like to add something on the taxonomy in particular.
I will just say that the tax is clearly a game changer in the financial market at the end, because that's what the taxonomy is the basis of the new framework on sustainable finance, because this is the basic definition of what is sustainable, as we already said. And we can expect that now, maybe what is important is what around the taxonomy as well, because the taxonomy says and defines what is green actually, and does not say anything about the rest. And now we can expect a lot of developments around this taxonomy. As mentioned by Alexandra before, for example, the disclosure regulation was also adopted last year, and the disclosure regulation will force financial institutions to disclose information in their periodic report, in the pre-contractual disclosure to their customers, information on how they incorporate this taxonomy and ESG considerations into their investment decisions. Then I think that we should see this taxonomy as the basis of the whole framework, and probably this taxonomy will also lead to new measures and new developments that will be adopted in the forthcoming years. I think it was also already mentioned that the Commission will publish a new strategy for sustainable finance, I think next month, at least before year end. And in this new strategy, for example, there is also the idea to develop a brown taxonomy. And that's what the green taxonomy is, the definition of what are the activities that can be considered as green. The brown taxonomy will define the activities that we should consider as harmful for the environment and so on. This is a sensitive topic for us. We are not so supportive of the brown taxonomy, for example, because we think that it is not good to reduce the investment universe, and we think that the transition can be promoted even in the worst sector by engagement, for example. I think that's it for the taxonomy on my side.
Thanks a lot, Saif. And I'll come back to Patrick on this, because Patrick, from an asset manager's perspective, how are you looking at these things as funds for good while designing products, while speaking to institutional investors or retail? How are you looking at these big regulatory changes, which is an offset of the 2018 step that was taken in the EU? How do you see this as an asset manager?
Yeah. First of all, I can give a small testimonial on the way we saw the industry changing in the last years. So if I'm looking back like 3 years ago or 4 years ago, but even 3, I think, a real minority of asset manager had SRI products. I mean, it was like really niche, and it was not the subject of attention. In 3 years, that totally changed in the way that now the majority, almost all asset managers must have at least one offer in SRI products. No, okay, that's a fact, but that doesn't mean that the industry is sensitive or has ambition for this. And to be honest, my perception is that it's a minority again of asset managers that have really a real ambition on SRI. And I think the taxonomy and all the work from the European Union to give common rules and norms in terms of ESG and so SRI is really important, because it will avoid to have like green and social washing, or I would say SRI products that are not SRI at all. So this gives a good way for the final investor to be able to say, okay, if there is a label, so there are national labels. In Belgium, we have towards sustainability, which is the name of the label. It gives a certain guarantee of minimal effort in terms of SRI policy. So that's a good thing. But I think the industry is, the biggest part of the industry is working as follower. So the work of taxonomy and the European Union is really pushing them. And also the regulation. So I think Saif was talking about this. like we have MiFID 3. So MiFID is for the bankers and brokers, is the diligence. So they put the pressure to them to be diligent and to ask to their client what is their risk profile, and to force them to match the risk profile with the product they offer. So that was MiFID 2. MiFID 3 is going further in this direction, but it's also introducing sustainability and SRI products in the way that, from my perception, in MiFID 3, all the intermediaries, brokers or bankers should ask their clients their sensitivity about SRI products. So that's a good thing. And on top of that, I think we have we see this as a mission because we have a lot of, all our range is SRI. We have the mission with also organization like Mattrvest, and what is ENA doing also is to give education, give clear explanation, and make the end consumer, that we say, or end investor, aware of what he's doing with his money, and also give all this information to the bankers and brokers so that they feel comfortable explaining this to their clients. And this is, from my perspective, it is going in the good direction, of course, but we still have a lot of work to do on that point. So if we take an average broker or banker, I don't think they feel comfortable with the concept of SRI. So we try with some other asset management to give trainings, explanation, so that they feel comfortable. Because SRI is about subjectivity. So it's always difficult when you, as a banker, you propose a product to your client for his savings, and then you see that one of the first lines is, I don't know, Total, Shell, whatever, and the investors have difficulties to understand that. So you can give an answer to that and explain why this company is in the portfolio, but you need to have a certain education and knowledge on that field. So we try to work on that, and there's a lot of work to do. I don't know if it answered the question.
Completely, Patrick. And I think that's at the base of it, that is the problem, that people don't even want to talk about finance, forget pensions. Because I think when we talk about finance and savings and investments, in general, pensions get the roughest stick, because we are trying to talk about how you'll be getting some money 40 years from now. So it's just what is tagged as boring. And I know AEIP has been trying to focus on this topic a bit, and about pension communication. And in fact, we did a presentation to them as well. But that's a very, very relevant topic of the fact that we need to have education, and the consumer first needs to know that it's their right to know about what they are actually investing in, or where is their money actually going. And Saf, just to round up this discussion, I'd just like to come back to you to get a quick comment, and Hina, if you can add on to that. How can the users today exercise their right? Do you have any views on that? Like, how can you as an individual or anyone living in the EU find out where actually the money is going? I don't know, Hina, if you want to start, or Saf, whoever wants to take this first.
You mean, what you mean exactly by the question?
I mean that if I am an individual and I want to find out if my pension is sustainable or not, how do I take the first step?
Okay, I mean, as I said before, the regulatory framework is not mature yet. Then that's true that there are a lot of developments ongoing. And one of the points we already mentioned also is this disclosure regulation. This disclosure regulation will set up new requirements for all financial market participants to disclose information on how you screen ESG in your investment decision. And you will need to disclose this information in the pre-contractual disclosure to members and beneficiaries in the case of pension funds. Then in the future, you will be able, as an individual, to find all the information in pre-contractual disclosures. And also part of the information will be published on the website and as well on the annual reports, depending on which kind of information you need to find actually. It is also important to note here, I mean, I don't want to enter into technicalities here, but for example, that's where the Commission is making a distinction now between two kinds of financial products. You have, for example, what they call the financial products that promote environmental, social, and governance characteristics, and financial products which pursue an investment and a sustainable objective directly. The first category is broader and is not so strict. It means in the case of pension funds, for example, we can fit in this category because the case of pension funds, you have as your main objective to ensure a certain retirement income, but you can also apply some sustainable finance strategy, so some ESG strategy in your investment decisions. Then this kind of category could encompass with pension funds. The second category, which is stricter and which defines that you should aim at a certain sustainable investment objective, is not really applicable on the case, to the case of pension funds. But the disclosure requirement for the second category in the pre-contractual disclosures will be quite more extensive than the disclosure required for the first category. That's a bit technical and a bit extensive. We can enter into this kind of discussion if we want, but I mean, there is a lot going on. Yeah. And that's what in the future, we will have access to a lot of information on that. That's true that also, as I mentioned before, there is a lack of availability of ESG data for the moment, and financial market participants are not able to provide this information today. That's a very difficult question. There is also a lot, I saw that there are some questions on that also in the chat, and there is also a lot going on with regard to this aspect. For example, at the European level now, there is a review ongoing on the non-financial reporting directive, which is the directive that would impose new reporting requirements on companies, and the companies will have to disclose information on their activities, on the sustainability level of their activities. This is very needed for the financial industry to be able to comply with the new requirement on disclosures, because if we don't have the data, we cannot comply with the requirement. But there are still some big challenges on this aspect as well, because, for example, pension funds are international investors. They don't only invest into the European Union. And there is a big question we have here. How will we be able to achieve data on our investment outside the European Union? That's a big question. We don't have an answer on that for the moment. And this is also a problem for us that would make difficult the compliance with the new disclosure requirements. I mean, there is a lot going on, but there is also a lot of uncertainty for the moment on very important points that we still need to discuss with authorities, and we would like to find solutions with regard to these points, because of course the industry is very committed to comply with all this, because we know that this is very important. Another point that I would like to mention quickly maybe is also that, for example, one thing that could be done and that we are moving with European authorities is the possibility to create, for example, a database at the European level with ESG data on companies, financial institutions, and so on. That will be an open source database. We are also discussing this with authorities, and this is also a possibility in the future. That will also be very helpful to make this framework effective in practice. Then, as I said, the framework is not mature yet. A lot is still to be done, but we are going in the right direction, I think.
Thanks a lot, Saif. I think you already addressed a few questions which are coming up in the Q&A section, and I'll address a question from Sneha on this. And I want to get your comments on exactly this topic that Saif was talking about, but I'll add the point on lack of data that Saif is bringing up, that that is a challenge. Then how have you seen the movement on that part, if any, during the campaign as well as launching Make My Money Matter? How have you seen that move? But firstly, a very basic question, and I would love to know your view of what you are telling the people who are supporting you, and how do you get started?
Absolutely, thanks. I think just to perhaps the answer will bring in all those things. I think the challenge to get started is a huge one, because I think exactly as Saif said, and he outlined the sort of first two levels of it really well. One is at the policy level. It's how do you come up with the frameworks and the right measurements to talk about it, about the impact that firms have, and what do those frameworks look like. And then the second one, which he also spoke to, is the sort of advocacy and regulatory level, which is how do we then get legislation and how do we get firms to voluntarily say that they will tell us about their impact? How will they disclose that? How can they make that information apparent? But I think the third bit is the one that really speaks to, and we can talk about the lack of the data, which is a huge problem, but actually the third one is the real challenge here, which I think is a strategic communications one, is that even where we have the data, even where people are reporting, I mean, we're doing some campaigning at the moment around net zero and Paris, trying to find out the basics of what a pension fund or pension provider's climate commitments are, involves a level of research and understanding and familiarity with the websites of a financial company, the ability and understanding to trawl through tens of documents about fiduciary duty and complete with jargon, references to pieces of regulation that ordinary people don't understand. And I think the easiest way that we found to get started is actually for people to ask the question. If people ask the question of their pension providers, and it's been fascinating, we've asked people to email their providers and say, I want my pension, really simply, I want my pension to reflect my values. Here are some things I care about. Please, can you send me some information on how sustainable your pension is and the kind of impact it has on people and planet? And the kinds of things we get back, a 200-page photocopied, uploaded document outlining every single thing the pension fund has ever done, and every single fund they're invested in, and the specifics about it. A document with 20 different links leading to 20 different fund managers, all of whom have their own ways of managing these things and who talk about these things separately. And it's very clear that the finance industry haven't got to that point, but from my point of view, it's only when consumers ask for it and when we can get the kind of movement created to start saying, I care about this, I want you to communicate about this to me in a way that I can understand, that will actually force large investment houses and pension providers who have the means to pay for strategic comms and to think about simplifying it, to actually provide this information in a meaningful way that helps people make informed choices. And I think regulation and the government has a role to play in this, but actually this is a really big campaigning ask for us. And it's sort of the other side to what's been discussed in loads of detail here. And I think that's why it's so challenging, right? Because we're asking for the information to be accessible to consumers because we realize the kind of urgency we have because of the climate emergency, because of the social problems we're seeing, that finance becomes sustainable fast. But also on the other side, we understand that people are trying to sort of, what's the phrase, build the car while we're driving it, in the sense of thinking about how people report impact and how people ask firms to show that impact in a meaningful way. So there isn't an easy answer, but I think for consistency, what you get back.
Thanks a lot for ending with that statement, Hannah. There's no easy answer. I mean, I think it comes to pensions, it gets so much more complicated than even normal financial investments that it just is sometimes a hosh-posh. But I think it's much more confusing for a day-to-day person who really wants to make an impact. And I think, as my co-founder Diane always says, that if my money is going to funding companies which are destroying my tomorrow, what's the point of it? And that's kind of the basis of the fact that if something has to go sustainable in finance, it should start with pensions. I'll try to combine some of the questions because we are running out of time, but what I'll do in the meanwhile is for attendees to actually start taking our poll, which was, like we had mentioned, about jargon as well as the overall session. So while you guys vote, we can actually take one question. And Patrick, I wanted to ask you this, talking about data and ESG, because we have a few questions on that. And you talked about the whole change in the landscape from SRI and how it has evolved with certain assets, few asset managers taking it very seriously. Now, Funds for Good, which is what you run, has a very unique model wherein you have impact embedded in as an asset manager. But how have you seen the data becoming better or data becoming more comprehensive or detailed as as these regulations are coming in, or there is a move towards an improved ESG, if I could use that term?
Yeah, regarding the data, we have to be honest that we have more and more data available. The data we use to make the SRI analysis to pick up the right companies we want to invest in. I mean, the availability of data is much bigger now than some years ago. But it has nothing to do with the regulation, with the taxonomy. This is just the work of some data providers. So we have now more data providers doing a better and better job and assessing a broader universe of companies. In the meantime, those data providers do not always agree on the definition or the valuation of the ESG scoring of a company. So you should have, you take Sustainalytics, for instance, or MSCI, and take both, and then you have different score for a totally opposite score for one company. This can also happen. So we don't have one common analysis by company. So that's one difficulty, I would say, that is remaining. So we have, I don't know if we have to work on this, but it should be interesting that the data providers should work a bit together to kind of have a common definition of what would be a good score, a good scoring company on different aspects. So that's the first thing. The data provider is sometimes diverging. Sometimes they try to do properly the analysis, but they don't see the reality because they are sometimes the data they collect is just sent by the company itself. So they have to make some audits. A company should say, okay, we're acting properly. This is a nice report. That's what we're going to do. But in the practice, not at all what they are doing. And so as a fund manager, it's really difficult because we should go in detail and go to see every company, to meet the people working for the company, to meet the clients, which is totally to trust the data providers. And so we, in a way, we should put the pressure on the data providers to make their really best efforts to be able to see that the company is behaving effectively good or not. And this, we had just a TV show in Belgium some months ago that was showing, they were analyzing SRI funds, and they were taking in like the best company in an ethical fund, and they choose this company, and they went in detail, and they didn't know this company was using children to work in their factories. They were polluting like hell, but the fund manager didn't know this, and so there is the trustability of the figures is also something important, and so this is something we have to where the industry has to move forward, and that would help. So for the data, my main concern as an asset manager is to get the right data and to be able to have a data between two data providers. Oh, could I manage to find a good one? But I know it's difficult because it's sometimes subjective. You could take, for instance, an oil company that is polluting a lot, but it's decided to change totally its strategy in the coming years. So how do you assess this? Is it a good or is it a bad company to invest in? And so maybe some provider would say it's a bad company to invest in, maybe so I'd say it's a good to invest in. So it's difficult again.
No, I agree with that, and I think we've that is a great point to kind of wrap up this session also, Patrick, because and I think as Saf had clearly pointed out that at the end of the day, the buck starts at company reporting, the data getting better, and that's only when the PEP and the EU taxonomy and the clauses that are being embedded into it can become effective. And for us, and for all of us to remember, is that we have the right to ask. So I think the first thing to do is to exercise that right to ask, whether it is your banker, whether it's your financial advisor, or whoever it is. Just start with asking the question. And I think that itself, you might think that alone doesn't lead to a change, but it does, and that's the whole point, and which is why even we started a campaign called My Money, My Planet, and similar to what Hina and all are doing with Make My Money Matter in the UK. And the idea is this, that basically to make you aware that you can actually cause a change by just starting that question. So,
yeah, and maybe
yeah.
You have also the responsibility. You have a power with your investment, so much, even more power than as a consumer, as a saver. So, yeah, I fully agree with what you said.
No, I completely agree with you, Patrick. And with that, what I'll do is I'll try to wrap up this session, and I'll give a quick sharing on how you can stay connected with us, because this is our last session. There is a parallel session going on, so which is the financial advisor matching session that we're doing after this. However, if you want to stay in touch with us, do go to visit our website or our social media. You can follow us. We do a weekly newsletter on sustainable finance. You can do that. I also wanted to take this opportunity with whoever is here to thank these lovely ladies who are at the background, and they have been making this festival possible. We are not a large organization. We are a very, very, very young startup. So putting this together took a lot of sleepless nights. So, but it's only possible, and I can actually talk to you guys and moderate these sessions because a lot of people have been working hard for the last 2-3 months on getting this together. But thanks to all of you for joining. And I just wanted to end the session with this slide saying that it is very important that we start thinking seriously about not just how we consume sustainably, but how we save sustainably, because we are running out of time. And COVID, if it has shown us anything, is to basically really step up the way we think about everything. And thinking about climate, thinking about sustainability should be the top of the agenda now, not just for policymakers, not just for bankers, but for us as individuals, because we can create a change. So with that, I'd really want to thank everyone in the panel for joining us and giving us an insight on a complicated topic. And we have to accept that fact. But thanks a lot for joining us and giving us a lot of insights into what can be done and what is possibly happening. And thanks to everyone who's joined us on Facebook Live as well as Zoom. So we'll be ending the Step Up Festival here. If you're interested in financial advisory, which is responsible, please do get in touch with us at Mattrvest, and we'll try our best to help you out on that. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you very much.